The chair was cold. I noticed that first. After 200 years of human ambassadors sitting in that same provisional seat, a seat that was never truly ours, never given a nameplate, never granted a permanent assignment, the chair was still cold, as if even the furniture knew we did not belong here. I did not sit down. I walked into the grand conclave chamber of the Interstellar Council at 6 in the morning, station time, when almost no one was around. A few junior clerks from the Arun Collective shuffled papers near the eastern corridor. A Veth maintenance drone hummed along the far wall. No one looked up. No one ever looked up when a human entered a room. That was fine. I had not come to be seen. My name is Caroline Reyes. I had been Earth's senior ambassador to the Interstellar Council for 11 years. Before me, it was Ambassador Leon Ford. Before him, Ambassador Grace Okafor. Before her, a long line of patient, careful, brilliant human beings who came to this chamber with hope and left with slightly less of it each time. We passed that hope down like a torch, generation after generation, even as the flame got smaller. I set the document on the table. 1 page, no cover letter, no formal speech prepared, no press release scheduled, just 1 page of clean, clear language that said, in simple terms, that the United Human Government was withdrawing from the Interstellar Council, effective immediately, and wished all member species well. I straightened the page so it sat perfectly parallel to the edge of the table. Then I left. I did not look back at the chamber. I did not look at the towering murals on the walls that showed the great moments of galactic history, none of which included a human face. I did not look at the long curved table where 44 species had the right to vote on the fate of the galaxy, while humanity sat in a separate chair, slightly to the side, slightly behind, with a small placard that said, Observer Status, Provisional. 200 years of that placard. I walked down the main corridor of the council station, past the diplomatic reception hall, past the gallery of founding species portraits, past the coffee stand run by a Dravos named Sekavul, who had been one of the only genuinely kind people I had met in 11 years of service. He was not at his stand yet. It was too early. I had timed it that way because I did not want to say goodbye, and I did not want to explain myself. Explanations were for people who still had something to prove. The docking bay was quiet. The human vessel sitting in Bay 9 was a mid-sized diplomatic transport called the Unspoken. Someone in the naming department back home had a sense of humor, or maybe it was not humor at all. Maybe it was something more honest than that. Lieutenant Owen Garrett was waiting at the ramp. He was 26, crew cut, from a small town in northern England, and he had the specific kind of calm that very young people sometimes have when they have not yet been worn down by the world. He looked at me, and then at the bag over my shoulder, and he understood immediately that we were not coming back. "Ready when you are, Ambassador," he said. "I'm not an ambassador anymore," I told him. He nodded slowly. "Ready when you are, Caroline." We boarded. The ramp sealed. The Unspoken detached from the docking clamps with a low, mechanical clunk that I felt in my chest more than heard. Through the small porthole at the end of the corridor, I watched the council station drift away, its enormous circular frame lit from within by the soft gold light of 1,000 occupied offices, its antenna arrays reaching out into the dark like fingers trying to hold onto something. I watched it until it was small enough to fit behind my thumbnail. Then I went to my cabin, sat on the edge of the bunk, and did something I had not done in a very long time. I sat still. No briefings to prepare. No diplomatic language to carefully choose. No sessions to attend where I would raise concerns that would be acknowledged with polite nods and then buried in subcommittee. No more mornings spent reviewing the record of the previous session and noting, again, that humanity's requests had been moved to the next agenda. The next agenda. They had been saying that for 200 years. I thought about Leon Ford. He had served as ambassador for 19 years. In his final address to the council, a speech that was recorded and preserved in human archives but that no council member had ever formally responded to, he said something I had memorized as a young student. He said, "We have given everything we have to this alliance. We have asked for nothing but to be counted as equals. We will keep asking, because that is who we are." He kept asking. So did Grace Okafor. So did the 8 ambassadors before her. So did I. for 11 years. And then one morning I woke up, read the latest session notes, saw that our application for full voting membership had been tabled for the 63rd time, and felt something shift inside me. Not anger. I had moved through anger years ago. It was something quieter than anger, and much more final. I understood, in that moment, that we were never going to be given a seat at that table. Not because we had not earned it, not because we were not capable, but because the people who controlled that table had decided, a long time ago, that having us nearby was useful, and having us equal was threatening. We were a tool, a very effective, very patient, very dedicated tool that had spent 2 centuries asking to be treated like a partner. Tools do not get to be partners. That is not how the people who use tools think. I did not tell anyone what I planned to do, not the Secretary General of the United Human Government, not my staff, not Owen Garrett until the morning I walked into his office and told him to have the unspoken fueled and ready. I submitted the paperwork for the withdrawal through an internal channel that would not process it until I had already left the station. There was no announcement, no press conference, no dramatic final speech to the council chamber. I put one piece of paper on a table, and then humanity left. The unspoken entered its first fold jump 2 hours after leaving the station. I felt the familiar lurch of faster-than-light transition, the brief moment where everything goes still, and the stars outside the window smear into long white lines. Then we were somewhere else. Human space. Our space. Owen knocked on my cabin door and handed me a cup of tea without being asked. He sat across from me in the small chair and did not say anything for a while, which I appreciated. "Do you think they've found it yet?" he asked eventually. "The document." "Probably not," I said. "The morning session doesn't start for another 3 hours, and even if someone found it on the table, they'd assume it was a petition." He almost smiled. "Another petition. We submitted 41 of them," I said. "Over 200 years. 41 formal petitions for full membership. Do you know how many reached a full council vote?" "None," he said. He knew the history. Everyone on the crew did. "None," I agreed. We sat with that for a moment. Outside the porthole, the stars were still and bright and very far apart. Out here, in human space, the stations were ours. The relay networks were ours. The patrol routes were ours. 200 years of building and defending and maintaining, and it was all out here, quiet and solid and real. I thought about the Void Swarm incursion of 2387. I had been 12 years old when it happened, but I had studied it obsessively at the academy. The swarm had come in through the outer belt, and the Council's combined fleet had managed exactly 4 hours of organized resistance before the tactical situation collapsed. It was the Human Rapid Response Division that had held the line, not just held it, but pushed the swarm back across 3 systems in 11 days. The Council's official history called it a coordinated joint effort. There was a memorial plaque in the main corridor of the station. No human name was on it. I finished my tea. Owen collected the cups and left me to the quiet. I did not feel victorious. I did not feel sad. I felt the way you feel at the end of a very long journey when you finally sit down and take off your shoes. A deep, bone-level relief that something is finally, genuinely over. We had not left in anger. We had not left with ultimatums or threats or a declaration of grievances broadcast on every frequency. We had left the way you leave a room where no one notices you were ever there, quietly, without ceremony, and without looking back. The council would find the document. They would read it. They would, I imagined, be confused at first, then worried. Then, slowly, they would begin to understand. But that was their journey to take. Mine was already finished. I stretched out on the bunk and closed my eyes. The hum of the Unspoken's engines was steady and low. Somewhere behind us, across several light years of cold space, a piece of paper sat alone on a table, in a chamber where 44 species had spent 2 centuries deciding that humanity was not quite worth the trouble of respecting. That paper was now the most important document in the galaxy, and I was already asleep before anyone found it. The first transmission came 18 hours after we left. I was in the small galley eating toast when Owen appeared in the doorway with a tablet in his hand, and an expression on his face that was caught somewhere between amusement and disbelief. "They found it," he said. I took another bite of toast. How bad? He looked at the tablet. The Council's Chief of Protocol has sent 4 messages. The VETH delegation has sent 9. There's a general emergency session called for this afternoon. And, he paused, the Arun Collective has sent a message that just says, and I'm quoting directly, "Please confirm this is not an error." I held out my hand. He gave me the tablet. I read through the messages slowly. The way you read something you have been expecting for a long time. They were panicked. Not on the surface. Diplomatic language is very good at hiding panic under formal phrases. But underneath the careful words, the structure was breaking apart. You could feel it. The Interstellar Council's Chief of Protocol, a Keth elder named Vorcelian, had written, "The Council acknowledges receipt of the document left in the main chamber and requests clarification on its legal standing and whether the United Human Government is aware of this submission," which meant, "We do not want to believe this is real. Please tell us it is not real." I set the tablet down on the galley table. "Send nothing," I said. Owen nodded. He had expected that. "Not even an acknowledgement?" he asked. "They acknowledged 41 of our petitions," I said. "Not once did they respond to a single one in a meaningful way. We can give them the same courtesy." He took the tablet back. "Understood." I finished my toast. That was how it began. Over the next 30 days, I watched the Interstellar Council come apart at the seams. Not loudly, not all at once, but the way old structures do when the foundation quietly shifts. I watched it from a small observation lounge on Human Station Meridian's Rest, 3 systems deep into human territory, drinking coffee and reading transmissions that were not addressed to me, but that our intelligence networks collected anyway. Day 3. The Council sent a formal diplomatic envoy to the nearest human outpost, a Dravos vessel, middleweight diplomatic class, carrying 2 representatives and a request for a meeting. The outpost's automated response system replied, in perfectly polite and grammatically correct language, "Thank you for your message. The United Human Government is no longer a participant of the Interstellar Council. We wish you a safe journey." The envoy waited for 48 hours. No further response came. They left. Day 7. 17 council stations across 4 systems reported atmospheric processor failures. These were complex systems, climate regulators that kept the air on massive orbital platforms breathable and stable. They required specific calibration, specific parts, and specific technical knowledge to repair. For the past 60 years, every atmospheric processor maintenance contract across the Council's network had been held by human engineering firms. Those contracts had a standard 30-day wind-down clause. The 30 days had started the moment I left. I read the maintenance reports and felt a kind of tired sadness that I had not expected. I had not planned this as retaliation. The contract expiration was simply a natural consequence of withdrawal. But watching it happen in real time was strange. All those years of humans quietly keeping the lights on, keeping the air breathable, keeping the systems running, and no one had ever thought to ask what happened when we stopped. Owen sat across from me in the observation lounge on day 7 and pulled up a schematic of the Council's atmospheric network. 34%, he said. That's the portion of the network that runs on our systems. 41% if you count the secondary filtration units, I said. I checked. He stared at the schematic for a long moment. Did any of them know this? Some of the technical staff, certainly, I said. The senior diplomats? The council elders? No. They never looked at the maintenance reports. That was our job. He set the schematic down. That is remarkable. That is Tuesday, I said. That was always just Tuesday for us. On day 9, the VETH delegation made a formal demand inside the council chamber. I did not have a direct feed of the session, but a Dravos contact sent me a summary that evening. The VETH representative, a senior statesman named Garel Oss, who had personally voted against human membership 6 times, stood before the council and declared that humanity's withdrawal was an act of provocation and that the council had a legal obligation to compel human return through diplomatic pressure. The council debated this for 5 hours. At the end of those 5 hours, someone finally asked the question that should have been asked at the very beginning. What diplomatic pressure exactly did they have? Humanity had no territory within council jurisdiction. Our stations were in human space. Our ships operated under human registration. We had signed no treaty that required our participation, only the provisional membership agreement, which had a unilateral exit clause that any first-year law student could find in 30 seconds. We had no assets the Council could freeze, no population centers within their reach, no supply lines that depended on their goodwill. We had been the ones providing goodwill for 200 years. The leverage they thought they had did not exist. It had never existed. They had simply never needed to look for it before, because we had always stayed. I got that summary at 10 in the evening. I read it twice. Then I closed the tablet, walked to my room, and stood at the window for a while, looking out at the stars. I thought about Grace Okafor. She had served for 23 years. She was 71 when she finally retired, and her retirement interview, published in the Earth Diplomatic Archive, was the most restrained piece of writing I had ever read. She was asked if she was frustrated by the lack of progress on human membership. She said, "I am not frustrated, I am informed." That was all she said about it. The interviewer moved on, probably not understanding what she meant. I understood it now. On day 12, 3 species submitted unofficial back-channel inquiries to the United Human Government, not to rejoin anything, not to negotiate, just quiet messages asking how we were doing and whether we were open to independent bilateral trade arrangements. The Alun were among them, so were the Sorvan, and, surprisingly, the Dravos, which surprised me only for a moment, until I remembered that the Dravos had tried to sponsor human full membership in the Council 4 times and been blocked each time. I forwarded those inquiries to the Secretary General with a single line of my own: "When you're ready." On day 14, a journalist from the Council's official media network broadcast a segment on what she called the human withdrawal crisis. She had clearly done her research. She listed, carefully and in order, the systems that were now experiencing maintenance shortfalls. She listed the medical protocols that were running without update, because the update licenses were held by human biotech firms. She listed the FTL relay nodes that were operating on reduced efficiency, because the calibration schedules had lapsed. The segment was pulled from the official feed 6 hours after broadcast. A copy of it reached my tablet 8 minutes after that, forwarded by a source I will not name. I watched it 3 times. On day 20, Owen came to the observation lounge with a look on his face that I had learned to read over our months working together. It was the look he had when something had happened that he did not quite know how to explain. "Sekavul sent a message," he said. I sat up straighter. Sekavul, the Dravos who ran the coffee stand in the Council Station's main corridor. He was not a diplomat or a politician. He was a small business owner who made excellent coffee and had, over the course of 11 years, become the closest thing I had to a friend on that station. He had never asked me for anything, except to know how I was doing. He had never made a single comment about human membership or council politics. The message was short. It said, "They are arguing now about who is responsible for the fact that they never thought to ask how things worked. I thought you would want to know this. Also, I have saved your usual table. I do not know why. Old habits. Stay well, Caroline." I read it twice. Then I set the tablet down very carefully on the table and looked out the window for a while. Owen did not say anything. He understood. On day 26, the Council made its second attempt at contact. This one was more serious. Not an envoy vessel, but a full diplomatic transmission, encrypted at the highest protocol level, addressed directly to the United Human Government's Secretary General. It requested a formal dialogue on the terms of re-engagement. The Secretary General, a measured and careful man named Arthur Webb, who had been in the role for 6 years and had the kind of quiet backbone that does not announce itself until the moment it is needed, sent back a response that was exactly 1 sentence long. "The United Human Government is happy to receive delegations at a time of our choosing, at a location of our choosing, under terms of our choosing, and will respond to this message within 90 days. 90 days. I heard about the Council's reaction to that response through 3 different channels, all arriving within the same hour. The word that kept appearing, across species and languages and diplomatic filters, was stunned. They were stunned. 200 years of humanity arriving at their convenience, on their schedule, in their chamber, under their rules. And now a 90-day wait. at our convenience. Owen brought me coffee when he told me about the response. "Do you think they understand yet?" he asked. I thought about it seriously before I answered. "They understand that something has changed," I said. "They don't understand what, exactly. They think this is a negotiation. They think we are applying pressure to get a better deal. And when they realize it's not that?" I wrapped my hands around the coffee cup. Outside, a human patrol vessel drifted past the observation window, running lights steady and quiet against the dark. "Then they'll understand," I said, "that we didn't leave to get something from them. We left because we finally decided we didn't need anything from them." Owen looked out at the patrol ship. "That's going to take them a while," he said. "Yes," I said, "it will." I drank my coffee. The stars outside were very still. Somewhere out there, across the light years, a chamber full of ancient institutions was beginning to feel, for the very first time, the specific weight of a silence that 200 years of patience had finally earned. We did not fill that silence. We let it work. I was in the middle of a quiet afternoon when Lieutenant Petra Walsh knocked on my office door and told me that the Council's archive division had done something no one had expected. They had started reading. Not diplomatic correspondence, not the current emergency files. They had pulled the historical record, 200 years of session logs, contribution reports, maintenance contracts, scientific attribution documents, and tactical after-action reviews, and they had assigned a full audit team to go through all of it. I set down the book I was reading and looked at Petra for a moment. "Who ordered it?" I asked. "A council elder named Rova Sen," she said. "Elun species." She apparently stood up in an emergency session and said that if they were going to debate what to do about the human withdrawal, they needed to first understand what they had actually lost. Rova Sen. I knew that name. She had been on the council for 40 years, a quiet figure who rarely spoke in open session, but who, according to every experienced diplomat I had ever spoken to, was the sharpest mind in the room whenever she chose to use it. "Smart," I said. "Very," Petra agreed. The audit findings began leaking within the week. Not officially. Someone inside the council administration was forwarding documents to independent channels, piece by piece, the way you move something heavy by carrying it in stages. Each piece that arrived told a different part of the same story. The FTL relay network. Everyone in the galaxy used it. The relay network was the backbone of interstellar communication. Without it, messages between star systems took years instead of minutes. The Council's official history credited the Keth Consortium with its development. There were memorial plaques. There was a founding document signed by Keth engineers. The Keth Consortium had received recognition, trade benefits, and annual commendations for 300 years based on that network. The audit found, buried in a project file dated 212 years ago, the original engineering schematics. The lead designer's name was on the cover page. Her name was Dr. Amelia Cross, born in Manchester, Earth, lead engineer, United Human Government's Deep Space Communications Division. The Keth Consortium had provided the funding and the political connections. Dr. Cross had provided every single technical solution. The attribution had been arranged by a joint committee that had, quietly and without any announcement, decided that giving a provisional species credit for a galaxy-changing invention was politically inconvenient. Dr. Cross had died at 67. She had received a government pension and a small retirement party. The Keth Consortium had received a monument. I read this particular document 3 times, not because I was surprised. I had suspected something like it for years. I read it 3 times because I wanted to hold the reality of it clearly in my mind, the specific, detailed, documented reality of it, not as an abstract grievance but as a fact, with a name and a date and a cover page. Dr. Amelia Cross. The nanite protocols came next. Universal medical nanites were the most important single medical development in galactic history. They were programmable microscopic machines that could be introduced into any biological system and configured to address a nearly unlimited range of medical conditions. They had eliminated several diseases across dozens of species. They were used in every hospital on every inhabited world in Council space. The credit belonged to the Arun Collective. This was common knowledge. The Arun had received a Nobel equivalent prize for it. Their development centers had been given protected status. There was a children's educational program on the Council's public network that showed young students how the Arun had changed medicine forever. The audit found the original research. A human doctor named Dr. Philip Grant, working out of a medical research station in the Outer Belt, had developed the core programming architecture for the nanites 40 years before the Arun's announcement. He had published his findings through an internal human research journal, which, at the time, was not indexed in the Council's main academic registry because human publications were classified as provisional status and therefore did not qualify for standard indexing. The Arun had accessed that journal. The lead researcher had written, in a private communication that was now part of the audit record, that the human framework requires only minor adaptation to become viable for multi-species application. Minor adaptation. They had adapted his work, filed the broader patent, received the recognition. Dr. Grant had spent the last 20 years of his life quietly writing papers that nobody outside human space ever read. I was sitting in the observation lounge when Owen came in with the document about the void swarm. He sat down across from me without saying anything for a moment. He put a tablet on the table between us. "The after-action review," he said. "The real one, not the official version." I already knew the official version. Every human did. The Void Swarm incursion of 2387, classified in Council records as a coordinated joint effort, defended successfully through multi-species cooperation and Council tactical planning. There was a plaque. There was an annual ceremony. The real after-action review told a different story. The Council's combined fleet had made contact with the swarm at the outer belt perimeter and lost formation discipline within the first 4 hours. 2 major vessels had retreated without authorization. The command structure had fractured along species lines, with 3 different flag officers issuing contradictory orders simultaneously. By hour 6, the swarm had broken through the outer perimeter and was moving toward inhabited systems. At hour 7, the Human Rapid Response Division arrived. The division had not been part of the original defense plan. They had been on a training exercise 3 systems away. Their commander, a woman named Admiral Ruth Calloway, had picked up the battle data on her long-range scans and, without waiting for Council authorization, had changed course and moved her entire division into intercept position. She had no orders. She had not asked permission. She had looked at the situation, calculated what needed to happen, and done it. Over the next 11 days, the Rapid Response Division had held the line, organized the other species' forces around their tactical framework, and pushed the swarm back across 3 systems. The casualty rate among human crew was the highest of any species involved. Admiral Calloway had been wounded in the engagement that ultimately turned the battle. The Council's after-action report, written 6 weeks after the event, credited the victory to coordinated multi-species response and commended the Council's Strategic Planning Division for effective crisis management. Admiral Ruth Calloway was mentioned once, in a footnote. The memorial plaque in the Council corridor listed 17 species. It did not list humanity because, at the time, the Council had not yet decided whether to count humanity's contributions as official or merely supplementary. They had decided not to count them. I sat with that document for a long time. The thing that stayed with me was not the injustice of it. I had known about that, in a general way, for years. What stayed with me was the specific detail of Admiral Calloway not waiting for orders, not calling the Council for authorization, not submitting a formal request to the appropriate committee. She had looked at a crisis, she had known what to do, and she had done it, because that was the kind of people we were. We had always just done the work. Quietly, effectively, without waiting for credit or permission. We had built and maintained and defended and created, and when the recognition came, if it came with someone else's name on it. And we had stayed anyway. For 200 years, we had stayed. 2 days after the audit findings began leaking publicly, the Dravos and the Elune did something extraordinary. They called a joint press event. Not a council session, not a formal diplomatic meeting. A press event, open to any media outlet that wanted to attend, broadcast on 17 different networks simultaneously. 2 senior representatives, a Dravos elder named Ven Soreth and an Elune scholar named Quilana, sat at a table and spent 3 hours going through documents. They had done their own research on top of the official audit. They read out names: Dr. Amelia Cross, Dr. Philip Grant, Admiral Ruth Calloway, a human architect named Daniel Marsh, who had designed the structural framework for 4 of the Council's largest stations, a team of human ecologists who had restored the atmospheric biosphere of the Aruan homeworld after an industrial collapse, a restoration that the Aruan's own literature described as a natural recovery process. They read name after name after name. Each one came with dates and documents and records. Ven Sarath spoke at the end of the event. He was very old. Dravos live longer than humans, and he spoke slowly and carefully. He said that the Dravos had attempted to sponsor human full membership in the Council 4 times. He said that each attempt had been blocked in committee. He said that he was not proud of how long it had taken him to speak about this publicly, and that the reason it had taken this long was that he had believed, each time, that the next application would succeed. He had been wrong 4 times. Quilana from the Elune simply held up a single document at the end. It was the original petition for human full membership from 200 years ago. The first one, the one that had started everything. She said, "They asked once. They were told to wait. So they waited. And they kept asking, and we kept telling them to wait. And now they have stopped asking, and I think we should all sit with that for a while." The broadcast ran for 6 hours on the main networks before the Council's communications office issued a request to reduce the prominence of the coverage. By then, it had been seen by half the inhabited galaxy. The secondary consequences arrived quickly after that. 7 member species submitted internal council motions demanding a formal inquiry into attribution practices over the previous 2 centuries. The Keth Consortium issued a statement saying that the FTL relay network had always been developed in collaboration with multiple research teams, and that the historical record was more complex than recent reports suggested. This statement was not well received. 3 junior council members who had previously said nothing publicly about human membership gave interviews to independent media. All 3 said variations of the same thing. They had supported human membership privately for years. They had not said so publicly because the political environment within the council made such support professionally risky. I read each of these interviews carefully. Not with anger, not with satisfaction exactly. With something closer to recognition. The specific feeling of watching the shape of a thing become visible that you have known was there all along, but that no one else could see until the light changed. Owen came to me with the Keth Consortium statement and raised an eyebrow. "Complex historical record," he said. I said. Dr. Cross would have had thoughts about that. Dr. Cross had the patience of someone who knew that the record does not disappear, I said. It only waits. He sat down across from me. Outside the window, a supply transport was making its approach to Meridian's Rest, its running lights blinking steady against the dark. A human ship, coming to a human station, moving on its own schedule, in its own space. "Do you think they'll ever fully admit it?" he asked. "The council, the attribution, all of it." I thought about that honestly. "Some of them will," I said. "The ones like Rovasen, who ordered the audit, the Dravos, the Elune. They will say it plainly, because they are more interested in accuracy than in comfort. And the others? The others will say it was complicated, that it was a different time, that everyone was doing their best." I paused. "And they will not be lying exactly. They will just be doing what people do when the truth is uncomfortable. They will find the version of the truth that costs them the least." Owen was quiet for a moment. "Is that why we left?" he asked. "Not to get the credit, not to force the admission, just to stop being part of a system that did that." I looked at him. He was young. He had grown up after the first generation of council membership, after the initial hope had already settled into the long, patient grind that the ambassadors before me had carried. He had joined the diplomatic service because he believed in something, not naively, but with the clear-eyed belief that good work matters even when it is not recognized. "That's exactly why," I said. He nodded slowly. "Good," he said. "I just wanted to make sure I understood." Outside, the supply transport completed its approach and settled into the docking bay, with the steady precision of a crew that knew exactly what they were doing. No one was watching. No one was giving them credit. They did not need anyone to. They just did the work. Some things never changed. The delegation arrived on a Tuesday. 12 of them, 12 species represented in a single group, arriving on 3 separate vessels that had traveled together from the council station, a deliberate arrangement, I was told, meant to signal unity. They docked at Meridian's Rest at 8 in the morning and were escorted to guest quarters that were comfortable without being extravagant. My staff had made sure the rooms were clean and well stocked, and that every dietary requirement had been accounted for. We were good hosts. We had always been good hosts. I did not see them that day. Not because I was being unkind. I had a legitimate scheduling conflict, a planning meeting with the Meridian's Rest Infrastructure Council that had been arranged 3 weeks earlier and that concerned actual, ongoing work that needed to happen regardless of who was docked in our bay. I sent a message to the delegation that morning through the proper channels, apologized for the delay, and informed them that I would be available to meet on Thursday. Owen told me later that the Council's chief diplomatic liaison, a Keth representative named Vorselian, had spent most of Tuesday and Wednesday trying to reach me through 4 different contact channels. Each message was received, logged, and responded to with a polite note informing him that I would be in the meeting on Thursday. I heard he was not accustomed to waiting. I thought about all the times humanity had waited. Then I stopped thinking about it and went back to my infrastructure meeting. Thursday morning, they came to the meeting room on level 7, a clean, functional room, with a long table and good light, and a window that looked out over the station's main docking hub. I was already there when they arrived. Not to establish dominance, I am not interested in that kind of theater, but because I find it easier to think when I have had a few minutes alone in a room before it fills with people. I watched them come in, 12 representatives, the Dravos elder Ven Sorath, who I recognized and respected, a Veth statesman named Gurel Os, who I recognized and felt entirely neutral about, representatives from the Elun, the Keth, the Arun, the Sorvan, and 6 other species, some of whom I knew by reputation, and some of whom I was meeting for the first time. They sat. I sat. Owen stood near the door, which was his preference. Vorselian spoke first. He was a careful, practiced diplomat, and he opened with a statement that was clearly prepared. The Council's acknowledgement that the current situation represented a significant disruption, its recognition of the depth of the human contribution to the galactic community, and its desire to open a constructive dialogue toward re-engagement. He spoke for 8 minutes without stopping. When he finished, I let the silence sit for a moment. Then I said, "Thank you. That was very clearly stated." He nodded, evidently expecting me to continue with a counterstatement. I did not. Ven Sorath spoke next. He was more direct. He said that the Dravos supported human full membership without reservation, and had done so for more than a century, and that they were prepared to formally sponsor a membership resolution at the earliest possible council session. I thanked him genuinely. Gurel Os from the Veth spoke third. He said that the council was prepared to offer humanity 2 permanent seats on the Security Council, back-paid formal recognition for all major contributions identified in the recent audit, and an accelerated pathway to full voting membership that could be completed within 6 months. I listened to all of this. I wrote notes. I have a habit of writing notes by hand, which confuses people who expect everything to happen on a tablet, but it forces me to process what I am hearing, rather than just recording it. When Gorelos finished, everyone was looking at me. I set down my pen. I looked at them. 12 faces, 12 species, all watching me with the particular expression that powerful people have when they are waiting for someone less powerful to accept something. The expression had not changed. That was what I noticed first. They were still, underneath all the offers and the prepared statements, and the journey across 3 systems, looking at me the way they had always looked at us, like we were the variable in their equation, like this was still their meeting, in their framework, on their terms, and they were generously waiting for us to step back into the correct position. I said, "Why?" Vorselian blinked. "I'm sorry?" "Why?" I said again. "Not why now. I understand why now. Systems are failing. The audit has been published. 7 species are submitting internal motions, and the Dravos and the Elun gave a press event that was seen by half the inhabited galaxy. I understand the current pressures. What I am asking is a different question." I waited. Vorsellian started to speak. I continued. In 200 years, humanity submitted 41 petitions for full membership. We provided the foundational work for your FTL relay network. We developed the medical nanite protocols that are in use in every hospital in Council space. We held the line at the Void Swarm incursion when your fleet could not. We maintained 41% of your atmospheric processing systems, 17% of your food supply chain logistics, and 23% of your construction and infrastructure contracts. I picked up the pen again and held it lightly. We did all of this as a provisional member with no voting rights, no formal recognition, and a seat that was described in your own charter as temporary. Silence. So my question is not about what you are offering now, I said. My question is, what changed? Not the circumstances, not the practical pressures. I mean, what changed in how you see us? Because if the answer is nothing, if we are simply too expensive to lose, and that is the whole of it, then I want us to be honest about that. And if something genuinely changed, I want to understand what it was. Gorelos straightened. He was about to say something diplomatic. I reached into the folder beside my hand and placed a document on the table, then another, then another. 12 documents, each one a recorded statement, archived and dated, made by one of the 12 representatives in this room, or by their predecessors in the same position, about humanity, about our suitability for membership, about our temperament, our volatility, our status as a young species that needed more time to mature. The Veth delegation's statement from 60 years ago described humans as emotionally reactive and strategically short-sighted, unsuitable for the responsibilities of full council membership. Gorelos looked at the document in front of him. He did not deny it. To his credit, he did not deny it. I said, I am not putting these on the table to be unkind. I am putting them on the table because I think this conversation has to start from an honest place, and an honest place requires that we all see clearly where we have been. The room was very quiet. Vensorath spoke. He said, You are right. That surprised me slightly, not because I doubted him, but because directness of that kind is rare in diplomatic settings. He said, I am ashamed that it took your absence to bring us to this table. I have said, inside that council chamber, that humanity deserved full membership. I have said it, and then I watched it get buried in committee, and I told myself that I would try again at the next session. I was wrong to accept that cycle. I should have done more. The room was very still. I looked at him for a long moment. I know, I said. I believe you. Vorsellian cleared his throat gently. Ambassador, Caroline, we are prepared to offer. I heard the offer, I said quietly. Permanent Security Council seats, back-paid recognition, accelerated membership, 6 months. Yes. That is a generous offer, I said. And I want to be honest with you in return. Humanity will need to consider it. Not quickly. Not under the pressure of your current operational difficulties. We will consider it on our own timeline, through our own internal process, because that is what equal partners do. Gorelos said, How long? 90 days, I said. He blinked. 90 days. We gave you a 90-day response window when Secretary Webb sent his reply to your transmission, I said. That window stands. We will respond within 90 days of this meeting. The Keth representative started to say something about the urgency of the atmospheric processor situation. I looked at him. I understand the urgency, I said. Our engineers understand it. That is a separate, practical matter that our technical teams are prepared to discuss on a humanitarian basis, because we do not want anyone's population to be harmed by a policy change. That conversation can happen through appropriate channels at any time. It is not connected to the membership discussion. He stopped. That distinction, humanitarian assistance separate from political negotiation, seemed to take most of the room by surprise. They had expected us to use the technical crisis as leverage. We were not. Because that was not why we had left. We had not left to win a negotiation. We had left because we had reached the end of something. The meeting lasted 3 more hours. We covered practical matters, logistics, technical coordination, the humanitarian response framework. I introduced Owen as the lead contact for any urgent technical inquiries. He was calm and precise and excellent as always. At the end, as the delegation was preparing to leave, Ven Sorath stopped beside my chair. He said, very quietly, "I want you to know that I read the file on Dr. Cross, and Dr. Grant, and Admiral Calloway." I looked up at him. "I know those names do not undo anything," he said. "I wanted you to know that someone said them out loud, inside that council chamber. By name." I held that for a moment. "Thank you," I said. He nodded and walked out. Owen came over after the room had emptied. He sat in the chair beside me. Neither of us said anything for a little while. 90 days, he said eventually. 90 days, I agreed. What happens at 90 days? I looked out the window. In the docking hub below, the 3 council vessels were still berthed, their lights steady in the dark of the bay. "We decide," I said. "The whole government decides. Parliament, the regional councils, everyone, not just the diplomats. What do you think they'll decide?" I thought about it carefully. Honestly. "I think they'll surprise everyone," I said, "including me." He nodded. Then, after a moment, a journalist stopped me in the corridor this morning, asked how the meeting went. "What did you say?" I said it went well, and that we'd have more to share in 90 days. He paused. She asked if I was optimistic. "And?" He smiled very slightly. I said I was informed. I looked at him. "Grace Okafor would have approved," I said. "I was counting on that," he said. The Parliament session lasted 4 days. Not because the debate was unclear. Humanity had always been good at knowing its own mind. The debate went on for 4 days because we were thorough, because we believed that decisions of this size deserved to be held up to every angle of light before they were made. I watched most of it from a public feed in my office on Meridian's Rest. I was not a member of Parliament. My job had been to represent humanity on the outside. What happened on the inside was the business of the people who had been elected to handle it. I watched the arguments for returning to the council. They were good arguments. The council's offer was real and substantial. 2 permanent Security Council seats was not nothing. Back-paid recognition, whatever that meant in practical terms, was a formal acknowledgement of what the audit had confirmed. 6 months to full membership was faster than any previous timeline proposed. The argument was made by several representatives that working from within was always more effective than standing outside, that the council's structure, flawed as it was still the closest thing the galaxy had to a common framework, that walking away entirely left a vacuum, and vacuums did not stay empty. Those arguments were heard seriously. They deserved to be. But there was another argument, made first by a young parliament member from East Africa, named Kwame Asante, who was 32 years old, and had been elected in his first campaign on a platform that had nothing to do with galactic politics, and everything to do with infrastructure investment in his home district. He stood up on the 3rd day of debate and said something simple. He said, "We have been trying to improve that table for 200 years. We built most of it. We maintain most of it. We have been asking to sit at it as equals for 200 years. And now they are offering us a seat, not because they think we deserve it, but because they need us back." He paused. "I don't want a seat at a table that was built to keep us out," he said. "I want to build a better table." The chamber was quiet. He said, "The Dravos have tried to sponsor our membership 4 times and been blocked. The Elune have expressed private support for over a century. The Sorvan sent us a back-channel message in the first week. These are species that the current council structure has also marginalized, also dismissed, also undervalued." He said, "What if we don't go back? What if, instead of asking them for a seat, we build a new room, and we invite everyone who was never given a fair seat to come and sit in it?" The chamber erupted, not in opposition, in the complicated, overlapping noise of a very large group of people recognizing something they had been thinking but had not said yet. It took another day and a half. The vote was not unanimous. 212 in favor, 89 opposed, 31 abstentions. The motion that passed was this: humanity would not accept the Council's offer of re-engagement under the current Council framework. Instead, the United Human Government would formally establish the Meridian Compact, a new interstellar alliance built on a founding charter of equal standing, transparent attribution, and open membership to any species willing to sign. The founding charter had been drafted in 48 hours by a team of lawyers, diplomats, historians, and, unusually, 3 engineers who had argued successfully that any governance document that did not account for infrastructure realities was missing half the picture. I read the charter the night before the founding session. It was 22 pages. It was not perfect. No document this size ever is. But it was honest. It said, plainly and without softening, that the new alliance existed because the old one had failed the species it was supposed to serve. It acknowledged, by name, the contributions of Dr. Amelia Cross, Dr. Philip Grant, Admiral Ruth Calloway, and 23 others whose work had been attributed elsewhere. Not as a grievance, as a foundation. As a reminder of what happens when you build on erasure, and a commitment to never build that way again. I sent a copy to Sekavul. His reply came 4 hours later. It said, "I have read it twice. I would very much like to sign it." I forwarded his message to the Secretary General with a note that said, "The Dravos are in." 11 days after the parliamentary vote, the Dravos formally applied to join the Meridian Compact. The Elun applied the next morning. The Sorvan applied 4 days after that. Then a species called the Viron, who had been members of the old council but had never held a voting seat despite being one of its founding contributors. Their situation was, in some ways, even older than ours. Within 30 days, 9 species had applied or were in active discussions. The old council issued a formal statement describing the Meridian Compact as a destabilizing influence and calling on current members not to defect. 3 days after that statement, 2 more species submitted applications to the compact. I was not surprised. What the council had never understood, what it had perhaps never been able to understand from inside its own structure, was that its authority had never come from its age or its size or its formal procedures. Its authority had come from the belief that it was the only option. Once something else existed, that belief was gone. The founding ceremony of the Meridian Compact took place on a day with no particular historical significance, which was deliberate. We did not want a symbolic date. We wanted to start on an ordinary day, the way real things start, not as theater, but as work. The ceremony itself was brief. 12 founding representatives from 10 species sat at a table that had been built specifically for the occasion, a round table, which had been someone's idea and which everyone else had agreed to without much debate. There were no raised seats, no provisional chairs, no observer placements. Every seat was the same. Owen stood a few feet behind me. Ven Sorath from the Dravos sat to my left. Quilana from the Elun sat to my right. Kwame Asante, who had been appointed as a founding representative at my personal request, a request he had accepted with the mildly stunned expression of someone who had not quite expected that his speech would lead here, sat across from me. We signed the charter. Each representative in turn. The signatures took 11 minutes. There were no speeches. We had agreed there would be no speeches. Speeches were for announcements. This was not an announcement. This was a beginning, and beginnings do not need speeches. They need people willing to do the work. A journalist from an independent outlet, not one of the council's affiliated networks, had been given press access to the signing. She was young, maybe 25, and she had the focused look of someone who understood that she was watching something important and was determined to get it right. As the signing finished, she approached me. She had a recorder and a notepad, a physical notepad, which I noticed and liked. "Caroline," she said, "do you feel vindicated?" I looked at her. The word hung in the air for a moment. Vindicated. I had thought about what I would say if someone asked me that, and I had thought about it carefully, because it was an important question, and it deserved a real answer. "No," I said. "Vindicated implies that the point was always to be proven right. The point was never that. The point was to build something that worked, and we couldn't build it inside a structure that wasn't designed to let us." She wrote that down. "Do you think the old council will survive?" she asked. "Some version of it, probably," I said. "Institutions are hard to kill, but survival and relevance are different things. The council spent 200 years confusing the two." She nodded. "What happens now?" I looked around the room. Ven Sorath was talking to Quilana, both of them leaning over a document. Owen was coordinating with the Viren logistics representative about the transit schedule for the next joint planning session. Kwame Asante was standing near the window with two other young representatives, all three of them deep in something that looked like an actual argument. A real one, the kind that happens when people take ideas seriously. "Now we work," I said. She wrote that down too. I walked to the window. The view from the ceremony room was of Meridian's Rest's outer docking hub, the same view I had from my office, different angle. Human ships and Dravos ships, and the first Elune vessel that had docked here in years, all sitting together in the same bay, all using the same docking protocols that a human engineer had designed 60 years ago, and that apparently worked for everyone. I thought about Amelia Cross, about Philip Grant, about Ruth Calloway standing on the bridge of her ship at hour 7 of the Void Swarm incursion, looking at a battle that had no good options, and deciding without hesitation which one was the least bad. I thought about Leon Ford and Grace Okafor, and all the ambassadors before me who had carried that torch through the long, patient years. I hoped they would have been satisfied, not triumphant, not vindicated, satisfied, the quiet feeling of work that is finally pointed in the right direction. A week later, I got a message from Arthur Webb, the Secretary General. It was short. It said, "Sekavul sent us a crate of coffee, the Dravos blend. He said to tell you the usual table is no longer saved, because he has moved to a new station, but that he will keep a seat clear for you whenever you come through." I read it twice. Then I wrote back, "Tell him I'll be there." I would, eventually. There was a great deal of work to do first. The Meridian Compact's first joint planning session was scheduled for 3 weeks out. The agenda was 47 items long, covering infrastructure, medical cooperation, communication networks, and the groundwork for a shared research attribution framework that would ensure no Dr. Amelia Cross ever had her name removed from a cover page again. 47 items. It was going to be a long session. I picked up the charter one more time, read the opening paragraph, put it down. I was tired, and glad, and ready. Outside, the ships in the docking hub went about their work, loading, unloading, arriving, departing, with the steady, purposeful efficiency of people who knew exactly what they were doing and did not need anyone to tell them they were doing it right. We had always been that. Now the record would show it.